While Jack packed his suitcase, giving me excuses about needing space, I was silently signing documents that would transfer ownership of the Westbrook Building to my name. The same building where his company leased the entire 15th floor. As he texted his girlfriend Rebecca about their weekend getaway using the joint account he thought I couldn't access, I was orchestrating the most perfectly timed reality check of his privileged life. He had no idea that his fragile, cancer-stricken wife had been quietly purchasing his company's building through an LLC he knew nothing about. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My hands trembled slightly as I sealed another envelope, but it wasn't from weakness. Dr. Chen had warned me that the chemotherapy might cause tremors, but this was different. This was anticipation. Through the window of Thomas Wright's downtown office, I could see the Westbrook Building where Jack was probably laughing with Rebecca in their corner office, planning their future while mine hung in the balance. Emma, are you absolutely certain about this timeline? Thomas watched me with a mixture of professional concern and personal admiration. His reading glasses caught the afternoon light as he organized the stack of documents on his polished desk. We could wait until you're feeling stronger. Your health should be the priority right now. I turned my phone toward him, showing Jack's latest text message. The timestamp read 3 minutes ago. Working late again tonight, sweetheart. Big client. Presentation tomorrow. Don't wait up. Love you. The timing, I said, signing another paper with deliberate precision, is perfect. My phone buzzed with another message from Jack. Each one corresponded perfectly with what I already knew. There was no client presentation. There was only Rebecca, the marketing director he'd hired 6 months ago, whose Instagram page was filled with carefully cropped photos of romantic dinners and weekend getaways. The same getaways that mysteriously coincided with Jack's business, trips, and my chemotherapy appointments. What Jack didn't know was that I'd discovered everything 3 months ago, on the day of my second chemo session. He had promised to take me to the hospital, but canceled last minute. Another emergency meeting. Olivia took me instead, holding my hand as poison dripped into my veins to kill the cancer that had invaded my body. When my phone died, she offered hers so I could check the schedule for my next appointment. That's when the notification appeared. On her screen, a tagged photo of Jack and Rebecca at Cascade Mountain Resort, the same resort where he had promised to take me once I beat this thing. Unlike what most people would expect, I didn't scream or throw things. I didn't immediately call him or confront Rebecca. Instead, I did what I've always done when faced with problems. I gathered information and made a plan. This final document, Thomas said, pointing to the last paper, completes the purchase of the Westbrook Building through your LLC. Once you sign, the transition of ownership will begin tomorrow morning. The current management company will continue daily operations, but you'll have full control over the property and all lease agreements. I thought about that morning, how Jack had kissed my forehead before leaving, how he had adjusted my scarf with gentle fingers, covering the hair loss that chemo had caused. I'll check in during lunch, he had promised. Try to eat something today, okay? Meanwhile, I had already seen the lunch reservation he'd made at Riverstone, Portland's most exclusive restaurant. Not for us, but for him and Rebecca. Paid for with our joint credit card, a card he thought I was too sick and distracted to monitor. Good, I said, my signature flowing across the final line. That's exactly what I want. My phone lit up with a notification, a casual Instagram story from Rebecca showing off a designer bracelet with the caption, "Best surprise ever. Someone knows exactly how to make a tough week better." I took a screenshot, noting the time and date. It matched perfectly with the withdrawal from our joint savings account, the account we had created for my potential medical expenses and treatments not covered by insurance. The transition team will begin implementing changes tomorrow morning, Thomas explained, organizing the paperwork into his leather portfolio. The tenants won't notice anything different initially, except the management contact information. Horizon Tech's lease agreement comes up for renewal in 30 days, which gives us perfect timing for the next phase. I pulled up a folder on my tablet, showing Thomas a detailed spreadsheet. Here's every company event Jack has charged to our joint account in the past 6 months. Notice how they align perfectly with Rebecca's posts about team celebrations and work accomplishments. Thomas's eyebrows rose as he scrolled through the data. This is remarkably thorough. I've had a lot of time between treatments, I said with a dry smile. Amazing how productive you can be when you're fighting for your life on multiple fronts. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a group chat notification. Our friends were planning a welcome home dinner for another friend, returning from Europe. Jack responded immediately. So sorry everyone, have to skip. Big client presentation tomorrow. Need to prep all night. I suppressed a laugh. I knew what kind of preparation he had planned. I'd seen the reservation at the Laurel Hotel downtown, charged to our joint account this morning. This initiates the lease review phase, Thomas Dawes said, sliding one final document across the desk. Once you sign this, we'll begin the comprehensive audit of Horizon Tech's lease compliance. I didn't hesitate. My signature flowed across the paper with newfound strength, each curve and line fueled by months of betrayal, pain, and quiet determination. By the way, Thomas added, gathering his files, Dr. Chen's office called while you were in the restroom. Your latest test results show significant improvement. The treatment is working, Emma. A notification popped up on my phone. Jack going live on Instagram from what was supposedly his office, the distinctive view of the Westbrook Building visible. In the background as he talked about grinding for success and making sacrifices for what matters. Let him celebrate his success, I said, standing up and smoothing the silk scarf around my head. A beautiful Hermes scarf Jack had bought me last month out of guilt. By this time next week, he'll have a very different story to share. Thomas gathered the papers, his expression both impressed and slightly concerned. You know, in 15 years of handling property acquisitions and lease disputes, I've never seen anyone quite as strategic, I suggested, picking up my purse. Or maybe just tired of being underestimated, he replied with understanding. As I walked out of the office, my phone buzzed one last time. Jack sending his nightly check-in. Hope you're feeling okay today, babe. Took your medicine? Miss you. Can't wait to be home with you this weekend. I smiled, typing back. Everything's going according to plan. Rest well, you'll need your energy next week. He'll think it's just another supportive message from his patient, understanding wife. But then again, he always did underestimate me. That's about to become his most expensive mistake. Little does he know, while he's been playing his games, I've been orchestrating something far more significant. 3 months ago, when I was first diagnosed and we were reviewing our finances for potential treatment costs, I discovered something interesting. The Westbrook Building, where Horizon Tech leased their offices, was up for sale. The owner, an elderly man looking to retire, wanted a quick, discreet transaction. Jack had mentioned in passing how fortunate they were to have locked in a below-market lease rate before downtown property values skyrocketed. While Jack was busy working late and missing my first rounds of chemotherapy, I was busy liquidating my inheritance, the money my grandmother had left me with explicit instructions to use it when it really matters, Emma. Cancer and a cheating husband certainly qualified. The morning after signing those documents, I dressed with deliberate care. A soft cashmere sweater that hid my thinness, a touch of blush to bring color back to my cheeks, and my favorite earrings, small, sapphires Jack had given me on our 5th anniversary before Rebecca entered our lives. The mirror reflected someone stronger than I felt, someone who was fighting battles on multiple fronts, and winning them both, one cell and one signature at a time. Good morning, I called out as Jack stumbled into our kitchen, clearly exhausted from his late-night preparation. Our spacious Portland home, The one we'd bought 2 years ago with dreams of filling it with children someday felt especially empty these days. The kitchen island where I sat drinking my ginger tea, the only thing that helped with chemo nausea, was the same island where I'd spent countless nights researching property law and cancer survival rates with equal intensity. Jack kissed my cheek, reeking of expensive cologne and deception. The same cologne I'd noticed in a selfie Rebecca had posted yesterday, captioned "office vibes" with a winking emoji. "You're up early," he noted with surprise, pouring himself coffee from the machine I'd programmed to start brewing at exactly 7:15, the time he always came downstairs after his shower. "Big day," I replied simply, sliding his favorite breakfast smoothie across the counter, the one that took me 20 minutes to make despite my fatigue. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Because maintaining normalcy was crucial to my plan. "Another treatment?" he asked, his brow furrowing with what looked like genuine concern. How masterfully he played this role. Concerned husband, successful businessman, community leader. No one would suspect he was planning his exit strategy from our marriage while I was fighting for my life. "No, just some paperwork with the bank. Nothing for you to worry about." I watched him check his phone, his lock screen still our wedding, photo from 5 years ago, but I knew his background was now Rebecca. I'd seen it reflected in our bedroom mirror when he thought I was asleep. "I've got that big presentation today," he said, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "The Wilson account could be our biggest client yet." The Wilson account. Another fiction. I'd already confirmed through Olivia, whose husband worked at a competing firm, that Wilson Technologies had signed with someone else months ago. "Knock them dead," I said, squeezing his shoulder affectionately. He didn't notice me taking a photo of his phone screen in the reflection of our refrigerator door, capturing Rebecca's message about lunch and her surprise for him afterward. After Jack left, I transformed our home office into my command center. The framed photos of our honeymoon in Bali disappeared into drawers, replaced by property documents, bank statements, and medical records. Despite the fatigue that lingered after each chemo session, I found energy and purpose in planning. Olivia arrived at 9, letting herself in with the key I'd given her months ago when the treatments began making me too weak to answer the door. "Jesus, Emma," she muttered, taking in the papers spread across my desk. "Are you sure you're up for this today? Your treatment was only 3 days ago." "I'm stronger than I look," I replied, pulling up the Westbrook Building's management dashboard. On my laptop, access granted as of 7 a.m. this morning when the ownership transfer became official. "That's not saying much," Olivia said gently. "You weigh like 90 pounds soaking wet right now." Which is exactly why this is the perfect time. He's never suspected a thing because he can't see past my illness. I turned the screen toward her, showing the building's tenant list with Horizon Tech highlighted. "Look at this. They've been late on their rent 3 times in the past year. Their lease specifically states that 3 late payments constitutes grounds for review and potential termination." Olivia's eyes widened as she read through the lease agreement. "Does Jack know about these late payments?" "As CFO, he's the one who would have approved them," I confirmed. But I doubt he ever imagined it would matter. The previous owner was hands-off, and the management company just charged late fees. My phone buzzed with a group text from our neighborhood book club about next month's selection. Jack replied immediately with an excuse about a business trip to Seattle during the proposed weekend. Olivia glanced at my phone. "Seattle?" I pulled up a hotel reservation confirmation on my laptop. The Four Seasons Portland, booked yesterday under his assistant's name, but charged to our joint credit card. 1 room, king bed, champagne package. "How are you so calm about all this?" Olivia asked, her own face flushed with anger on my behalf. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly aware of the bone-deep fatigue that was my constant companion these days. When you're facing mortality, you gain perspective. Cancer taught me I might not have time to waste on emotions that don't serve me. Anger wouldn't heal my body or fix my marriage. Strategic action might not save my marriage either, but it will ensure I'm not left financially vulnerable while fighting for my life. The doorbell rang. Thomas arriving with the property management team for our first official meeting as the new owners of the Westbrook Building. As they set up in our dining room, I checked my appearance in the hall mirror, adjusting my scarf to cover the patches where my dark brown hair had fallen out in clumps. Jack had been there the first time it happened, holding me as I cried. That was before Rebecca, before he started finding reasons to be absent during the hardest moments. "Mrs. Johnson," the property manager greeted me professionally. "We've prepared the tenant notification letters as requested. They'll be delivered electronically today and by certified mail tomorrow." "And the special instructions for Horizon Tech?" I asked, taking a seat at the head of our dining table, the same table where Jack and I had hosted countless dinner parties in happier times. "Their notification includes the lease compliance review addendum," Thomas confirmed. "As their lease is up for renewal in 30 days, we're exercising the owner's right to conduct a comprehensive audit of their payment history, property usage, and compliance with all terms." My phone lit up with a text from Jack. "Presentation went great. Taking the team for a quick celebration lunch. Don't forget your 2 p.m. medicine. Love you." I checked the time. 11:45 a.m., right on schedule. "How long before they realize what's happening?" I asked Thomas. "The notifications go out at noon. As CFO, Jack should receive it directly. If he's at lunch, he might not see it immediately, but he will," I said confidently. "Jack never goes anywhere without his phone, and he never ignores emails marked urgent from building management." The next few hours unfolded exactly as I'd anticipated. At 12:03 p.m., my phone began ringing, Jack calling repeatedly. I let it go to voicemail. By the fourth call, he left a message, his voice tense but controlled. "Emma, something weird is happening with our building lease. I just got a notice about a new owner and a compliance review. Can you check if we got anything at the house about the Westbrook Building? Call me back when you can." At 12:45, his tone had changed to confused urgency. "Babe, I really need you to call me back. There's something strange going on with the building lease. The management company won't tell me who the new owner is, and they're saying our renewal is on hold pending review. This could be really serious for the company." By 2:30, as I sat in Dr. Chen's office for my follow-up appointment, his messages had turned desperate. "Emma, please call me as soon as you get this. The building situation is critical. They're saying we have multiple lease violations and our renewal might be denied. We could lose our offices in 30 days. I can't reach you, and I'm really worried about both this and you. Are you okay? Did you make it to your appointment?" Dr. Chen smiled as she reviewed my latest blood work. "The numbers are moving in the right direction, Emma. Your body is responding well to treatment. How are you managing the side effects?" "Better than expected," I replied, thinking of more than just the cancer. "I've found that taking control of what I can helps me cope with what I can't." When I emerged from the doctor's office at 3:15, I had 7 missed calls from Jack, 3 from his assistant, and 1 from Horizon Tech's CEO. I also had an email notification. The property management company had scheduled the lease compliance review meeting for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp, with mandatory attendance for all company executives. I called Jack back as I walked to my car, my steps lighter than they had been in weeks. "Emma, thank God. Are you okay? Where have you been?" His voice was tightly wound with stress. "At my oncology appointment," I replied calmly. "The one you were supposed to take me to before this presentation came up. Good news, my numbers are improving." That's great, babe." He sounded distracted. "Listen, we have a situation with the building. Some new owner is threatening our lease. The whole company is in panic mode. I might have to stay late tonight to figure this out. The CEO is freaking out. On a scale from 1 to 10, how bad is it? I asked, sliding into my car, enjoying the rare moment of being the calm one in our relationship. 11, maybe 12. His voice cracked slightly. If we lose this lease, we're screwed. Commercial real estate in downtown Portland is through the roof right now. We'd have to relocate outside the city, maybe lose clients. The whole company could be at risk. That sounds serious, I said, keeping my tone sympathetic. Do you know anything about the new owner? No, that's part of the problem. Some anonymous LLC called Phoenix Rising Properties. Probably some corporate vulture looking to jack up rental rates or convert to condos. The irony of the company name I'd chosen, rising from the ashes of both cancer and betrayal, wasn't lost on me. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I assured him. You always do. Thanks for the vote of confidence, he sighed. Look, I've got to go. Emergency executive meeting. Don't wait up, okay? This might be an all-nighter. I understand completely, I replied. Some things can't wait. As I ended the call, another notification appeared on my phone. A private Instagram story from Rebecca, visible to me only because she didn't know I followed her under a pseudonym. The video showed her in Jack's office, pouting at the camera. Someone's stress level just went through the roof. Might have to provide some special stress relief later. Work wife, he needs me. I forwarded the video to Thomas with a simple message. Evidence item, $27 for tomorrow's meeting. When I arrived home, Olivia was waiting with takeout from my favorite restaurant, the first food that had actually appealed to me in weeks. So, she asked, unpacking containers of Thai food on the kitchen island. Has the bomb dropped yet? I showed her my phone with the string of increasingly panicked messages from Jack. Phase 1 complete. He's in full crisis mode. And the meeting tomorrow? 9 a.m. sharp, I confirmed, actually managing a few bites of pad thai. Thomas has prepared everything. The property management team will open with standard lease discussion before I make my entrance. Are you nervous? Olivia studied my face. I considered the question, searching for any hesitation within myself. Strangely, no. When you've faced your own mortality, confronting a cheating husband loses some of its intimidation factor. My phone rang again. Jack's. Mother this time. Barbara had been supportive throughout my cancer treatment, often coming to sit with me during recovery days when Jack was working. Emma dear, she began without preamble. Jack just called us in a state. Something about the company potentially losing its offices? He mentioned you weren't answering your phone earlier and he was worried sick. Barbara had no idea about Rebecca or Jack's betrayal. I'd kept that knowledge to myself, unwilling to divide the family while I was still formulating my plan. I was at my oncology appointment, I explained gently. Good news, actually. The treatment seems to be working. Oh, thank heavens. Barbara sighed with genuine relief. That's wonderful. Jack didn't even mention it. He was so wrapped up in this building situation. Yes, it seems there's new ownership. I'm sure it will all work out, I said, the understatement of the year. Well, don't let him drag you into his work stress, she advised. You focus on getting better. That's the only thing that matters right now. After hanging up, I turned to Olivia. I should feel guilty about involving his family in this, even peripherally. Did you feel guilty when you were vomiting alone in the bathroom after chemo while he was weekending with Rebecca? Olivia asked pointedly. The memory flooded back, me, kneeling on the cold tile, too weak to stand, reaching for my phone to call Jack only to see his Instagram post from Mount Hood, supposedly on a team building retreat. In the background of his photo, Rebecca's distinctive red coat was visible, along with her hand on his shoulder. No, I said firmly. No guilt. That night, Jack didn't come home. At 11:30 p.m., he texted that he was staying at the office, working, with the legal team to review the lease. I knew better. The hotel reservation was for tonight, and even a building crisis wouldn't change Jack's priorities. I slept better than I had in months. Morning arrived with a flurry of activity. Thomas and his assistant picked me up at 8:30, briefcase in hand containing all the documentation we'd need. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a stylish blazer over a silk blouse, tailored pants, and comfortable flats. Professional, polished, powerful. No one looking at me would see a cancer patient. They would see a property owner protecting her interests. Nervous? Thomas asked as we pulled into the Westbrook Building's underground parking. Focused, I corrected him, touching the portfolio in my lap that contained printed copies of every incriminating text, every suspicious charge, every Instagram post, and every missed appointment. Let's go remind my husband who I really am. The Horizon Tech executive conference room fell silent as I walked in at precisely 9:15 a.m., 15 minutes after the property management team had begun their presentation. 8 faces turned toward me in confusion, but I only cared about one, Jack's. He sat at the far end of the table, his face pale with stress and lack of sleep. When he saw me, his expression cycled rapidly through confusion, concern, and dawning. Horror. Emma? He half rose from his chair. What are you doing here? Are you okay? Thomas stepped forward smoothly. Gentlemen, ladies, allow me to introduce Emma Johnson, the owner of Phoenix Rising Properties, LLC, and your new landlord. The silence in the room deepened, broken only by a small gasp from someone. Probably Rebecca, who sat 2 chairs away from Jack, her expression frozen in shock. Thank you for accommodating this meeting on short notice, I said, my voice steady as I took the empty chair at the head of the table. As you've been informed, we're conducting a comprehensive review of Horizon Tech's lease compliance before making a determination about renewal. Jack's mouth opened and closed without sound, his eyes darting between me, Thomas, and the property managers. The company's CEO, Michael Barnes, recovered first. Mrs. Johnson, while this is unexpected, I'm sure we can come to a reasonable arrangement regarding our lease. Horizon Tech has been a model tenant. With all due respect, Mr. Barnes, I interrupted smoothly. The payment records indicate otherwise. 3 late payments in the past fiscal year, 2 unauthorized modifications to the office space, and multiple violations of the building's sustainability guidelines. I slid a document across the table, a detailed report of every lease violation, meticulously compiled by the management company overnight. These violations, while perhaps overlooked by the previous owner, are of significant concern to Phoenix Rising Properties, I continued. Our investment philosophy emphasizes ethical, business practices and responsible corporate citizenship. Jack finally found his voice. Emma, can we talk privately for a moment? Any discussions regarding the lease should include all relevant parties, I replied coolly. As CFO, you're certainly a relevant party, Mr. Johnson. Perhaps you'd like to explain why the rent payment due on March 15th was submitted on March 27th. March 15th, the day of my second chemotherapy treatment, the one he'd missed for an emergency meeting that actually involved a weekend with Rebecca at Cascade Mountain Resort. Jack's face flushed. There was a banking issue, a temporary cash flow situation. Interesting, I said, opening my portfolio. Because according to the company's financial statements, which are publicly available, Horizon Tech had sufficient operating capital during that period. Yet several charges were made to a corporate expense account that same weekend. I slid another document forward, printouts of the resort charges with Jack's signature. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her gaze fixed on the table. Michael Barnes looked between Jack and me, confusion evident on his face. I'm not sure I understand what's happening here, but if there are concerns about our financial management... This isn't about Horizon Tech's finances, Mr. Barnes, I clarified. This is about integrity, trust, commitment. Each word landed like a stone between Jack and me. As the new owner of this building, I have specific standards for the businesses I choose to house. Over the next 24 hours, my team will complete our review and make a determination regarding your lease renewal. I stood, gathering my materials with deliberate calm. Until then, operations may continue as normal, though I would suggest beginning contingency planning for possible relocation. Commercial space is quite difficult to secure in downtown Portland these days. As I turned to leave, Jack jumped up. "Emma, wait!" I paused, looking back at him with the same steady gaze I'd developed during countless medical procedures. Detached, resolute, beyond pain. "Yes, Mr. Johnson?" His eyes darted to his colleagues, then back to me, panic evident in every line of his face. "We need to discuss this. As husband and wife." A subtle murmur rippled through the room. Clearly not everyone present had made the connection until that moment. "Interesting that you should mention our marriage now," I said quietly. "It seemed to slip your mind during several important occasions recently." Rebecca stood abruptly. "I should step out for this. It seems personal." "Please stay, Ms. Miller," I said without looking at her. "Since you've been so integral to my husband's decision-making these past 6 months, those decisions have now affected his company's standing with its landlord. Very relevant to this meeting. Wouldn't you agree?" The color drained from her face as she slowly sank back into her chair. "My office," Jack said desperately. "Please, Emma, 5 minutes." I checked my watch, a deliberate gesture to remind him and everyone else that my time was valuable. 5 minutes. I followed him to his corner office, aware of the stunned executives watching us leave. As soon as the door closed, Jack rounded on me, his expression a mix of anger, fear, and disbelief. "What the hell is this? You bought the building? How could you possibly—" "My inheritance," I said simply. "Grandma always said to invest in real estate." "Your inheritance," he repeated dumbly. "The money we were saving for starting a family," I finished. Yes, that was the plan. Before cancer. Before Rebecca. He flinched at her name. "Emma, whatever you think is happening with Rebecca—" "Don't," I cut him off, my calm finally breaking. "Don't you dare stand there and lie to me again. I know everything, Jack. The weekends, the hotels, the gifts. I know about the Cascade Mountain Resort when you were supposed to be taking me to chemo. I know about the Laurel Hotel reservation. For tonight. Not last night, because you couldn't cancel your romantic getaway even for a company crisis, could you?" His face crumpled in shock. "How did you—" "Because while you were building a relationship with Rebecca, I was fighting for my life. And when you're fighting for your life, you pay attention. You notice patterns. You see what's real and what isn't." I stepped closer, my voice dropping. "And our marriage hasn't been real for months." "I can explain," he started weakly. "I'm sure you can. You're excellent at explanations. The problem is, I no longer need them." I checked my watch. Again. "You have 3 minutes left. Use them wisely." Jack ran his hands through his hair, his carefully constructed world visibly crumbling around him. "The company can't survive a move right now. You know that. We'd lose millions, maybe go under completely. 40 people would lose their jobs." "That would be unfortunate," I acknowledged. "Perhaps you should have considered the potential consequences before mixing business and pleasure so carelessly." "What do you want?" he finally asked, defeat evident in his voice. "Is this about punishing me? Fine. I deserve it. But don't punish the entire company." I studied him for a moment. This man I had loved, had planned to grow old with, who had held my hand when we received my diagnosis and promised we would fight it together, then had left me to fight alone while he built a new life with someone else. "What I want," I said finally, "is for you to understand exactly what you've thrown away. Not just your wife, but your integrity. Your commitment to 40 employees, whose livelihoods depend on your judgment. Your standing with your family, who will soon learn why their daughter-in-law bought the building housing their son's company. I moved toward the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. You have 24 hours to resign as CFO, end your relationship with Rebecca, and move your things out of our house. Do that, and Horizon Tech keeps its lease, with a modest increase in rent, of course. Property values have risen considerably. And if I don't? He asked, a hint of his old defiance returning. I smiled then, the same smile I'd given my doctors when they outlined my survival chances. Then you'll learn what I've learned these past 6 months, that some things once lost can never be recovered. As I opened the door, I turned back one last time. Oh, and Jack? My latest scans show the cancer is responding to treatment. I'm going to survive this. The question is, will your career? I walked out of his office with my head high, past the stunned executive still waiting in the conference room, past Rebecca, whose mascara was now smudged from tears, and into the elevator where Thomas waited. Phase 2 complete, I said as the doors closed. You were magnificent, he replied. What do you think he'll do? I leaned against the elevator wall, suddenly exhausted but exhilarated. He'll do exactly what I asked. Jack has always been predictable when his own interests are at stake. My phone buzzed, Jack's mother calling again. This time I would answer. This time I would tell her everything, because the woman who had faced cancer and betrayal simultaneously was done being silent, done being underestimated, done being the patient wife who waited at home while her husband built a life with someone else. The woman who emerged from that elevator owned more than just a building. She owned her power, her future, and the consequence of every choice Jack had made when he thought she was too weak to fight back. He would soon discover his most expensive mistake wasn't the lease violations or the company credit card charges for hotel rooms with Rebecca. It was forgetting who I was before cancer and underestimating who I'd become because of it. Your numbers continue to improve, she confirmed. If this trajectory continues, we may be able to reduce the intensity of your remaining treatments. That's wonderful news, Barbara exclaimed, squeezing my hand. I nodded, processing this development. What does that mean for the overall timeline? Potentially a shorter course than we initially projected, Dr. Chen explained. Though we'll still need to complete the full protocol, just with modified dosing. As the treatment drugs began flowing into my veins, I found myself contemplating this unexpected parallel. My body responding positively to treatment, finding a path to healing that might be less arduous than anticipated, even as my personal life was finding a new equilibrium that, while different from what I'd planned, offered its own kind of stability. Penny for your thoughts, Barbara said softly, noticing my contemplative expression. I was just thinking that winning doesn't always look like what you expect, I replied, watching the clear liquid drip steadily into my IV. Sometimes it's quieter, less dramatic. But no less meaningful, she added. Exactly. Later that evening, as I rested at home with Barbara keeping watchful company, my phone buzzed with a notification, an email from Thomas confirming that he'd reviewed the separation agreement and found everything in order from a legal perspective. All that's needed now is your signature when you're ready, he wrote. No rush. Take the time you need. It struck me as ironic that after months of urgent strategic planning, of racing against the dual threats of cancer and betrayal, I now had the luxury of time. Time to consider my next steps. Time to heal both physically and emotionally. Time to decide what I wanted beyond mere survival. Barbara noticed my distraction. Everything all right? Yes, I said, showing her the email. Thomas says the separation agreement is solid. She nodded, careful to keep her expression neutral. Will you sign it soon? I think so, I replied thoughtfully. It represents clarity, and I need that right now. Clear boundaries, clear expectations. Jack mentioned he's leaving for Seattle on Wednesday, she said. He asked if he could stop by before he goes to say goodbye. I told him that was entirely your decision. The request surprised me. After everything that had happened between us, a formal goodbye seemed simultaneously unnecessary and insufficient. What could possibly be said in a brief meeting that would adequately address the seismic shifts in our relationship? I'll think about it, I said finally. Right now, I just want to focus on getting through today's treatment effects. Barbara nodded, understanding the wisdom of taking one challenge at a time. Of course, rest now. Everything else can wait. That night, after Barbara had gone home with promises to return in the morning, I found myself unable to sleep despite the fatigue of treatment. My mind kept circling back to Jack's request to see me before leaving for Seattle, examining it from multiple angles like a complex puzzle. Was it for his benefit? Closure? Absolution? A chance to feel less guilty as he started his new life? Or was it genuinely for mine, respectfully acknowledging our history before geographical distance added another layer of separation? Or perhaps something else entirely, an opening, however small, to a different kind of future relationship? Around midnight, I made myself a cup of the special ginger tea Dr. Chen had recommended for nausea and took it to the garden. The night, air was cool but not uncomfortable, filled with the scent of late summer blooms and the distant sounds of the city. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat watching the stars, giving myself permission to simply feel rather than strategize for once. The truth was, beneath the hurt and betrayal, beneath the strategic planning and decisive action, I still cared what happened to Jack. Not enough to forget or easily forgive his abandonment during my greatest need, but enough to hope that he would learn from his mistakes, enough to acknowledge that his recent attempts at accountability represented growth, however belated. My phone lit up with a text from Olivia, who somehow always seemed to sense when I was awake and wrestling with difficult thoughts. Post-treatment insomnia? Need company or just virtual moral support? I smiled at her intuition. Just thinking. No company needed, but thanks for checking. Thinking about? She prompted. Jack asked to see me before he leaves for Seattle. Not sure if it's a good idea. Her response came quickly. What does your gut say? Not your strategic brain. Or your wounded heart. Just your instinct. I considered her question, setting aside both the careful planner and the betrayed wife within me. My instinct, when I could access it beneath the layers of protective calculation, suggested that closing this chapter with a direct conversation might help us both move forward, whatever forms our separate futures might take. Instinct says yes. With boundaries, I texted back. Then trust that, Olivia replied. You've protected yourself brilliantly. You can afford a moment of humanity now. The next morning, feeling stronger than expected after treatment, I texted Jack. I understand you want to see me before you leave. Tuesday afternoon would work, briefly. His response came almost immediately. Thank you. I appreciate it. What time works best for you? We settled on 3 p.m., late enough in the day that I would have energy, early enough that fatigue wouldn't be a factor, and brief enough by design that the visit couldn't become unduly emotional or complicated. Barbara, arriving with breakfast and gentle concern, seemed relieved when I mentioned my decision. I think that's wise, she said carefully. Whatever happens next, a clean ending to this chapter matters. The following days passed in a rhythm that was becoming familiar. Recovery from treatment effects, check-ins with Dr. Chen's office, updates from Thomas about the property management company, quiet moments in the garden when my energy permitted. I signed the separation agreement on Monday, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief as my signature made official what had been emotional reality for months. Tuesday arrived with unexpected sunshine after days of Portland's characteristic drizzle. I spent the morning with Olivia, who had taken time off work to help me reorganize my closet, a symbolic reclaiming of space that had previously been shared. We moved Jack's remaining clothes to the guest room, rearranged the master bedroom to better suit my needs during recovery, and ordered a new reading chair for the corner where his dresser had stood. "You should take a nap before he arrives," Olivia advised as we finished lunch. "You want to meet him at full strength." I smiled at her protective instinct. "This isn't a confrontation, Liv. Just a conversation." "Still," she insisted, "rest is strategic too." She was right, of course. I dozed for an hour, waking refreshed and clear-headed. Olivia left with a fierce hug and whispered encouragement, promising to call later to check in. At precisely 3:00 p.m., the doorbell rang. Jack had always been punctual, one of the many small compatibilities that had drawn us together initially. Through the window, I could see him on the porch, dressed in casual business attire rather than his usual executive suit, looking both familiar and somehow diminished. I opened the door with a calmness that surprised even me. "Hello, Jack." "Emma," he replied softly. "Thank you for seeing me." I invited him into the living room, where I'd arranged seating that allowed for comfortable distance. The armchair for me, the sofa for him, the coffee table between us like a neutral zone. He noticed the arrangement with a small, sad smile that acknowledged the careful boundaries. "You're looking well," he said as we sat down. "Mom mentioned your treatment is progressing better than expected." "It is," I confirmed. "Dr. Chen is cautiously optimistic." He nodded, genuine relief crossing his features. "That's wonderful news. Truly." "Thomas forwarded the signed separation agreement yesterday," I said, moving to practical matters. "Everything should be processed before you leave for Seattle." "I received confirmation this morning," Jack acknowledged. "Thank you for being fair about the terms." "You proposed fair terms," I pointed out. "I simply agreed to them." A silence fell between us, not exactly uncomfortable, but heavy with unspoken emotions. Through the window, sunlight illuminated the garden I'd planted during my early recovery days, now flourishing with late summer blooms. "I've been trying to understand," Jack said finally, his gaze fixed on his clasped hands. "Why I did what I did. Not to excuse it. There is no excuse. But to make sure I never cause that kind of pain again." I hadn't expected this opening, had prepared myself for apologies or awkward small talk, not genuine self-reflection. "Have you found any answers?" I asked, curiosity overcoming my initial reservations. He sighed deeply. "Some. Uncomfortable ones. When you were diagnosed, I was terrified. Not just of losing you, but of being inadequate to the crisis, of failing you when it mattered most." "So you created a self-fulfilling prophecy," I observed without rancor. "Yes," he admitted. "I convinced myself that distraction would make me stronger for you, that compartmentalizing would help me cope. But it was really just cowardice. Every time I missed a treatment, it became easier to miss the next one. Every lie made the next one simpler." I nodded, appreciating his honesty, if not his choices. "And Rebecca?" "A symptom, not the cause," he said carefully. "She represented an escape from the reality I couldn't face. Your illness, my fear, the possibility of loss. I'm not blaming her," he added quickly. "The choices were mine, but she was part of a pattern of avoidance, not the reason for it." This insight, while hardly justifying his actions, resonated with what I had observed during our marriage. Jack had always struggled with emotional challenges, preferring to solve problems with action rather than sitting with difficult feelings. My cancer had presented a problem he couldn't solve, a reality he couldn't control. "I appreciate your honesty," I said after a moment. "It helps to understand, even if it doesn't change what happened." I don't expect it to change anything, he assured me. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better, not to win. You back or ease my guilt, but because the person I became during your illness isn't someone I want to remain. Another silence fell between us, this one lighter somehow, cleared of unspoken tensions by his direct acknowledgement. The building purchase was brilliant, he said suddenly, with a small smile that held equal parts admiration and chagrin. Strategic, elegant, perfectly executed, pure Emma Johnson. Pure Emma Bennett, I corrected, using my maiden name deliberately. The woman who existed before us, who continued existing during us, and who will certainly exist after us. He nodded, accepting this reclamation of identity without protest. The financial world's loss was evident in how thoroughly you outmaneuvered everyone, including me. I did what was necessary, I said simply. I know, he acknowledged. And I'm genuinely sorry you had to. The conversation shifted then to practical matters. His new position in Seattle, the ongoing management of our separated finances, coordination regarding the house and remaining shared assets. It was comfortable, almost collaborative, like colleagues wrapping up a complex project with mutual respect. As our designated hour drew to a close, Jack stood to leave, looking around the home we had once shared with a mixture of nostalgia and resignation. I should go. I promised to keep this brief. I walked him to the door, maintaining the careful distance that felt right for this new reality we had created. At the threshold, he paused, turning to face me with unexpected vulnerability. In his expression, "Can I ask you something? Something I've wondered since that day in my office?" I nodded, curious. If I had been the husband you deserved during your illness, if I had never betrayed your trust with Rebecca, would you have told me about the building purchase before executing it? Would we have made that kind of decision together? The question was insightful, cutting to the heart of what had changed between us long before the confrontation in his office. Yes, I answered honestly. Before your affair, before you started missing treatments and lying about your whereabouts, we were partners, real ones. I would have brought you into any major financial decision. He nodded, accepting this confirmation of how much had been lost through his actions. Thank you for your honesty. And Emma, I truly hope your recovery continues to exceed expectations. You deserve that victory, and so many more. After he left, I returned to the living room, sitting in the quiet house that now felt entirely mine. There was sadness, yes, for the end of a relationship that had once held such promise, for the shared future we would never experience. But there was also a surprising sense of peace. Not closure exactly. Life rarely offered such tidy endings, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. All good? Need me to come over with wine or weaponry? I smiled at her protective loyalty. All good. Just conversation. No drama. Wine sounds perfect, though. Later that evening, settled on the patio, with Olivia and a glass of the first wine I'd been able to enjoy since starting treatment, approved in small amounts by Dr. Chen, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey of the past 6 months. When I was first diagnosed, I said, watching the sunset paint Portland's skyline in shades of pink and gold, I thought cancer would be the most difficult battle I'd ever face. Then, when I discovered Jack's affair, I thought betrayal would be the greatest pain. I never imagined fighting both simultaneously. Yet here you are, Olivia observed, winning on all fronts. Not winning in the way I expected, I acknowledged. Not getting everything back the way it was, but securing what matters most: my health, my financial stability, my sense of self. And your future, she added. Don't forget that. This isn't just about what you've preserved, but what you're free to create now. The phrase resonated deeply. free to create. After months of defensive strategy, of protecting and securing, the idea of creation, of building something new rather than salvaging something damaged, felt like permission to breathe fully again. My phone buzzed with a text from Barbara, checking in after Jack's visit. All went well with Jack. He's on his way home now. Still planning to come for your treatment tomorrow? Absolutely, I replied. And Barbara, thank you for continuing. To be my family through all of this, it means more than I can express. Her response came quickly. You are my family, Emma. That hasn't changed and won't change, regardless of legal documents. The following morning, as Barbara drove me to what might be one of my final full-strength treatments, I noticed subtle signs of Portland shifting toward fall, hints of color in the trees, a certain quality to the light that spoke of changing seasons. It seemed fitting, this natural transition mirroring the changes in my own life. You seem different today, Barbara observed as we parked at the medical center. More settled somehow. I considered her perception, recognizing its accuracy. I think I'm shifting from survival mode to something else, something forward-looking. That's wonderful, she said warmly, and well-deserved. In Dr. Chen's office, reviewing my latest tests before treatment, I received unexpected news. My response to therapy had been so positive that we could indeed reduce the intensity of my remaining sessions, potentially cutting my total treatment time by several weeks. The irony wasn't lost on me, that my in-laws were now stepping up to fulfill the promises my husband had abandoned. The safety net I'd fought so desperately to secure myself was being reinforced by the very family I'd feared might become adversaries. We should discuss tomorrow's meeting with the board, Robert suggested, his business mind always moving forward. They'll likely propose separating Jack's situation from the company's lease obligations. That would be the logical approach, I agreed, though implementing it might be complicated. Not necessarily, Robert mused. With the right structure in place, Horizon Tech could continue operations while addressing the internal HR situation independently. As we discussed potential scenarios, my phone lit up with a notification Jack had posted on Instagram for the first time in weeks. Curious, I opened the app to find a somber black and white photo of our wedding day with a cryptic caption. Facing the consequences of my actions. Some mistakes can't be undone. Barbara noticed my expression change. What is it? I showed her the post, watching as she processed this public acknowledgement of Jack's wrongdoing. He's setting the narrative, I observed, getting ahead of the gossip. Is that a problem? Robert asked. Not necessarily, I replied, but it suggests he's thinking about his image rather than genuine accountability. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with consecutive text messages. First from Rebecca. I've resigned from Horizon effective immediately. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused. You deserved better. Then from Jack. I've submitted my resignation to the board. We'll be effective immediately after tomorrow's transition meeting. I'll have my things out of the house by noon tomorrow. Do you want me to leave my key with my parents or under the mat? I showed the messages to Barbara and Robert, whose expressions reflected a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and resignation. He's complying with your terms, Robert noted. Apparently, I agreed, feeling strangely hollow. This was the outcome I'd orchestrated, yet victory tasted different than I'd imagined. Less triumphant, more melancholy. How do you feel? Barbara asked gently. Tired, I admitted, but resolute. I typed a quick response to Jack. Leave. The key with your parents. Take only your personal belongings for now. We can discuss household items later. His reply came immediately. Understood. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for everything. I didn't respond. Words, especially digitally transmitted ones, felt inadequate for the magnitude of what had transpired between us. We should go, Barbara said, noting my increasing fatigue. You need your rest, especially with meetings tomorrow. Will you be all right alone tonight? Robert asked, his paternal concern evident. I've been alone for months, I reminded him gently. Just now it's official. After they left, promising to check in tomorrow, I moved through the empty house with a strange sense of detachment. The home that had once represented our shared future now felt like a museum of broken promises. I paused in the doorway of our bedroom, the room where Jack had held me through nights of chemo-induced nausea, where he had also lied about his whereabouts and planned his escapes to be with Rebecca. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Need me to come over? Or bring ice cream? Or possibly weapons? Despite everything, I smiled. I'm okay. Jack's complying with all terms. Meeting board tomorrow. Victory, she texted back, adding, champagne emojis. More like armistice, I replied. Sleep came surprisingly easily that night, perhaps because for the first time in months, I wasn't carrying the dual burdens of fighting cancer and unraveling the mystery of my husband's betrayal. Both battles were now in the open, being fought in the light rather than shadows. Morning arrived with a flurry of emails. Official confirmation of Jack's resignation from Horizon Tech's HR department, a meeting agenda from the board, and a formal lease compliance review from the building management company, confirming all the documentation I'd need for today's negotiations. Thomas arrived at 9, briefcase in hand, his professional demeanor somewhat softened by evident concern for my well-being. You look better than I expected, he observed. Clarity has its benefits, I replied, pouring him coffee. Have you reviewed the board's agenda? Yes. They're proposing a clean break, accepting Jack's resignation, implementing a financial audit of his activities, and requesting a fresh start with you as landlord. He sipped his coffee thoughtfully. It's a reasonable approach. And in my best interest, I acknowledged. Horizon Tech is a stable tenant, despite the recent complications. Evicting them would create unnecessary financial disruption. So you'll agree to their terms? With modifications, I said, showing him the counter-proposal I'd drafted overnight. I want quarterly compliance reviews for the first year, a modest rent increase to reflect current market rates, and a lease amendment that explicitly prohibits related party transactions without board and owner approval. Thomas reviewed my terms, nodding appreciatively. Thorough as always, they may push back on the rent increase. They expect it, I countered. It's a negotiating point, not a deal breaker. As we prepared for the meeting, my phone buzzed with a notification from the home security system. Jack had entered the house, presumably to collect his belongings, as promised. Do you want to leave while he's here? Thomas asked, noting my momentary stillness. I considered the question. No, this is my home now. I won't be chased from it. Footsteps on the stairs announced Jack's approach before he appeared. In the kitchen doorway, looking startled to find us there, Emma. I thought you'd be at your meeting already. Not until 11, I replied calmly. He looked different somehow, diminished, as though resignation had physically reduced him. His normally impeccable appearance showed signs of hasty preparation, wrinkled, shirt, tie slightly askew. I'm just getting some essentials, he explained unnecessarily. I can come back later for the rest if now isn't good. Now is fine, I assured him. Take what you need. An awkward silence descended, thick with unspoken accusations and apologies. Thomas cleared his throat. I'll wait in the car. Take your time, Emma. After he left, Jack leaned against the counter, his posture screaming defeat. So this is really happening. It's been happening for months, I reminded him. We're just acknowledging it now. He nodded slowly. The board called an emergency session last night after I submitted my resignation. They're not happy with me. Understandable, I observed. Your personal choices have created significant professional complications. They mentioned you've agreed to meet with them today. Yes. What will you tell them? I studied him, this man I had loved enough to marry, who now seemed like a stranger. That depends on what they offer, but I'm not vindictive, Jack. I never wanted to destroy Horizon Tech, just to secure my position. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. And me? Did you want to destroy me? The question hung between us, weighted with 5 years of shared history. No, I answered honestly. I wanted you to face consequences. There's a difference. Jack moved to the window, looking out at the garden I'd planted during my first months of recovery, when gardening had become both physical therapy and spiritual refuge. Rebecca's leaving Portland, moving back to Chicago to be near her family. I said nothing. Rebecca's future plans were no longer relevant to mine. I've been offered a position in Seattle, he continued. Not C-suite, several steps down. But it's something. You'll rebuild, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. You've always been good at that. He turned back to face me, his eyes searching mine. And us? Is there anything to rebuild there? The question I'd been avoiding, the unknown territory beyond securing my immediate future. I don't know, I admitted. Right now, I'm focused on surviving cancer. That has to be my priority. Of course, he agreed quickly. I just thought, I hoped. Hope is a luxury I've had to ration lately, I told him gently. I can't afford to waste it on uncertainties. He nodded, accepting this harsh truth. I'll get my things now. I remained in the kitchen as he moved through the house, gathering clothes and personal items. Through the window, I could see Thomas waiting patiently in his car, giving us the privacy to navigate this painful transition. When Jack returned downstairs, suitcases in hand, he paused at the kitchen doorway. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am sorry, Emma. For everything. For not being the husband you deserved, especially when you needed me most. Thank you, I said simply. Forgiveness might come eventually, but it wasn't mine to give yet. Not while the wounds were still so fresh. Good luck with your treatment, he added awkwardly. Mom said she's taking you to the next appointment. She offered, I confirmed. I accepted. He nodded, seemingly relieved that I wouldn't be facing cancer alone, even if he wouldn't be the one supporting me. I'll leave my key with them as requested. Thank you. And then he was gone, the front door closing with a quiet finality that echoed through the house. I remained motionless for several minutes, absorbing the shift in my reality. The strategic plan I'd formulated had played out almost exactly as designed, yet the emotional landscape felt different than I'd anticipated. Less triumphant, more contemplative. Thomas knocked gently before re-entering. All set? I nodded, gathering my portfolio for the board meeting. Let's go negotiate a future. The Horizon Tech offices felt different as I entered them for the second time in 24 hours. Yesterday, I had arrived as an avenging force, determined to expose truths and demand accountability. Today, I came as a business owner seeking mutually beneficial arrangements. Michael Barnes greeted me in the lobby, his manner respectful but cautious. Mrs. Johnson, thank you for meeting with us, especially under these difficult circumstances. Mr. Barnes, I acknowledged with a professional nod. Shall we proceed? The boardroom was less crowded today, just Barnes, the CFO who would be replacing Jack temporarily, the head of legal, and 2 board members. The tension that had electrified the room yesterday had been replaced with a somber pragmatism. We want to begin by expressing our sincere regret for the situation, Barnes opened once we were seated. Jack's actions, both personal and professional, do not reflect the values of Horizon Tech. I appreciate that, I replied, keeping my tone businesslike. though I trust you understand my need to protect my interests given recent events. Absolutely, Barnes agreed quickly, which is why we've prepared a proposal that we believe addresses your concerns while allowing the company to maintain operational stability. The proposal, as Thomas had predicted, included acceptance of Jack's resignation, a comprehensive financial audit, and a request to maintain the current lease with standard market adjustments. What surprised me was the additional offer, a seat on Horizon Tech's advisory board, with a modest but meaningful stipend attached. We value your financial acumen, Barnes explained. And frankly, having the building's owner involved in company governance creates useful alignment. Thomas and I exchanged glances. This was unexpected leverage I hadn't anticipated. I'll need time to consider the advisory board position, I said carefully. But regarding the lease, I've prepared a counter-proposal. As I outlined my terms, I watched their expressions shift from apprehension to cautious relief. They had clearly expected more punitive measures, perhaps non-market rate increases or impossible compliance demands. My reasonable amendments were received with visible relief. These terms are acceptable in principle, Barnes confirmed after conferring quietly with his team. Our legal department will review the language, but I don't anticipate any significant obstacles. Excellent, I nodded, satisfaction flowing through me, not the fierce triumph of vengeance, but the steadier pleasure of fair negotiation. I look forward to a productive landlord-tenant relationship. As the meeting concluded with handshakes and carefully worded pleasantries, I felt a weight lifting. Not just the burden of planning and executing my strategy, but the deeper weight of uncertainty that had haunted me since my diagnosis. In the elevator descending to the lobby, Thomas allowed himself a small smile. Well played, Emma. You've secured your position without creating unnecessary enemies. That was always the goal, I reminded him. Protection, not destruction. And the advisory board offer? Will you accept? I considered the question as we exited the building into the bright Portland afternoon. Perhaps it would be strategically advantageous, but I need to focus on my health first. Speaking of which, Thomas checked his watch. Don't you have a doctor's appointment this afternoon? Yes, Barbara is picking me up in an hour. The strange new reality of my life, my mother-in-law stepping into the role my husband had abandoned. Will you be all right with everything that's happened? I looked up at the Westbrook Building, my building now, gleaming in the sunlight. I will be, one way or another. When I arrived home, the house felt different, lighter somehow, as if Jack's departure had lifted a cloud of deception that had hung over it for months. Olivia had left flowers on the kitchen counter with a note, celebrating your badassery. Call me later. I smiled, arranging the bright blooms in a vase by the window. There would be difficult days ahead. More treatments, legal paperwork for whatever form my separation from Jack would ultimately take, adjustments to my new reality as a property owner and potential company advisor. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was standing on solid ground rather than shifting sand. My phone rang, Barbara confirming our plans for my appointment. I'll be there in 30 minutes, dear. Do you need me to bring anything? Just yourself, I assured her. And maybe some ginger candies for after. The nausea can be rough. Already packed them, she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Along with peppermint tea and those protein bars Dr. Chen recommended. As I hung up, another text arrived from Jack. Signed lease termination for my Seattle apartment. Today. Starting over is harder than I expected. Hope your meeting with the board went well. I considered not responding, but eventually typed, meeting productive. Lease terms negotiated fairly. Taking care of yourself is part of starting over. His response came quickly, working on it, one day at a time. One day at a time. The mantra of recovery, from addiction, from illness, from life's devastations both expected and unforeseen. It had become my approach to cancer treatment, and now it would guide whatever came next in the aftermath of my marriage's Implosion. Barbara arrived precisely on time, her car loaded with the supportive supplies that Jack should have been providing all along. As we drove to the medical center, she shared updates on the family's reactions to recent events. Robert's sister called this morning after seeing Jack's Instagram post. "The family grapevine is certainly active," she noted with a wry smile. I told her the truth, that Jack made unforgivable choices and is facing appropriate consequences. "You didn't have to do that," I said, touched by her continued loyalty. "Yes, I did," she disagreed firmly. "Enabling bad behavior with excuses is what created this situation in the first place. We were too quick to accept Jack's explanations for his absences from your treatments, too willing to believe his work commitments were unavoidable. Never again." At the medical center, Barbara proved to be everything Jack had not been during my previous treatments: attentive, prepared, and fully present. She took notes during Dr. Chen's update, asked relevant questions about side effect management, and held my hand when the needle went in for my blood work. "You're responding well to treatment," Dr. Chen confirmed, reviewing my latest results. "The tumor has reduced significantly in size, and your blood markers are trending in the right direction." "So I'm winning?" I asked, needing to hear the affirmation. She smiled, understanding the deeper question beneath my words. "You're winning. Emma, on all fronts it seems." As the treatment drugs began flowing into my veins, the chemical warriors fighting the cellular betrayal within my body, I reflected on the parallel battles I'd been waging. Against cancer, against Jack's deception, against the fear of being left vulnerable while fighting for my life. Barbara squeezed my hand gently. "What are you thinking about? You have that strategic look in your eyes." I smiled, recognizing how well she knew me despite the complicated circumstances of our relationship. "I'm thinking about what victory really means, in cancer treatment, in life." "And what conclusion have you reached?" I watched the clear liquid dripping steadily into my IV, each drop representing both poison and possibility, killing damaged cells to make room for healing. That sometimes winning isn't about destroying your opponent. It's about creating space for something better to grow. The treatment session passed more comfortably than any previous one, not because the drugs were less harsh, but because the emotional burden I'd been carrying had lightened. No more detective work tracking Jack's whereabouts. No more pretending I didn't notice his absences. No more strategic planning to secure my future. Just the straightforward battle against cancer, which, ironically, now seemed like the simpler of my challenges. As we drove home, Barbara outlined a support schedule she'd organized with Olivia and several other friends. "We've created a calendar for your remaining treatments and recovery days," she explained, her organizational skills evident in the color-coded chart she'd printed. "No one expects you to manage this alone, Emma." The lump in my throat had nothing to do with treatment side effects. "Thank you," I managed. "It's what family does," she said simply. "Real family, not the kind that abandons their commitments when things get difficult." At home, Barbara helped me settle on the couch with tea and the bland crackers that sometimes helped with post-treatment nausea. "Robert will be by later with dinner, that soup from East Side broth that you liked last time." "You don't have to do all this," I protested weakly, even as I welcomed the support. "Yes, we do," she contradicted gently. "Not just because of Jack's failures, but because we love you. You're our daughter, regardless of what happens with your marriage." After she left to run errands, promising to return within 2 hours, I checked my phone to find several messages. Thomas confirming that Horizon Tech's legal team had accepted our proposed lease terms with only minor language changes, Olivia checking in on my treatment, and, surprisingly, Michael Barnes inviting me to formally consider the advisory board position when your health permits. No messages from Jack. I wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or disappointed by his silence. The doorbell rang, and I assumed Barbara had forgotten something. Instead, I opened the door to find a delivery person holding an elaborate arrangement of yellow tulips, my favorite flowers, though not the typical florist's choice for romantic gestures. The card read simply, "Fighting for you this time, not against you. J." I placed the flowers on the coffee table, my emotions too complicated to name. They weren't a peace offering. Jack was smart enough to know flowers couldn't begin to address what had happened between us. They weren't an attempt at reconciliation. The Seattle apartment lease he'd mentioned confirmed that. Perhaps they were simply acknowledgement of my battle with cancer, of his failure to support me through it, of the person I'd proven myself to be in his absence. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "On my way with soup. Barbara told me about your good treatment news. Proud of you, fighter." Fighter. The word resonated through me as I settled back on the couch, the yellow tulips bright against the fading afternoon light. I had been fighting cancer, betrayal, vulnerability. But perhaps the next phase would require a different kind of strength. The courage to heal, to rebuild, to determine what kind of life I wanted beyond mere survival. The following days brought a steady stream of developments. Jack completed his move out of our home, leaving behind a detailed inventory of what he'd taken and what remained. Rebecca's resignation from Horizon Tech was officially processed and announced internally. The building lease amendments were finalized and signed by all parties. My advisory board invitation was formalized with proposed terms for my review, when appropriate. Life was reorganizing itself around the new reality I had created through strategic action and unwavering resolve. 1 week after the confrontation in Jack's office, I sat in my garden with Olivia, enjoying a rare day of minimal side effects and Portland sunshine. "So, what happens now?" she asked, sipping the lemonade I'd actually had the energy to make fresh. "With the house? With Jack? With everything?" I considered the question, watching a hummingbird dart among the flowers I'd planted during early recovery days. "Now I focus on getting well. The financial situation is stable. The building provides income. Horizon Tech is a cooperative tenant. My immediate concerns have been addressed." "And Jack? Will you file for divorce?" The question hung in the air between us, birds chirping in the background as if to fill the silence. "Not immediately," I decided. "Legal separation first, I think. Gives me time to focus on treatment without additional stress." Olivia nodded, understanding the practical approach that had guided me through this crisis. "He keeps texting me. Asking how you're doing, if you need anything." This surprised me. "What do you tell him?" "That you're handling cancer with the same grace and strength you handled his betrayal," she replied with a small smile. "And that if he wants information about your well-being, he should earn the right to ask you directly." I laughed, a genuine laugh that felt foreign in my body after months of stress and strategic planning. "Has anyone ever told you that you're slightly terrifying as a best friend?" Says the woman who bought her cheating husband's building and orchestrated his professional downfall while undergoing chemotherapy, she retorted. We suit each other. The truth of that statement warmed me more than the afternoon sun. Through everything, cancer, betrayal, strategic maneuvering, Olivia had been my constant, the witness to both my vulnerability and my strength. My phone buzzed with a notification. The property management company confirming that Horizon Tech's first rent payment under the new agreement had processed successfully. Another piece of the new normal falling into place. "Did you ever imagine we'd be here?" Olivia asked, gesturing vaguely to encompass my situation. "When you were first diagnosed? When you first suspected Jack was cheating?" "No," I admitted. "When I got the diagnosis, I imagined Jack and I fighting cancer together, emerging stronger as a couple. When I discovered his affair, I imagined confrontation, tears, either reconciliation or immediate divorce, the typical script. Instead, you rewrote the narrative entirely," she observed. "Cancer taught me that," I reflected. "When the expected path is blocked, you find another route forward. You adapt. You survive." The following day brought my scheduled check-in with Dr. Chen, not a treatment day, just monitoring blood work and a physical examination. Barbara had planned to drive me, but I surprised both her and myself by declining. "I'd like to try going alone today," I explained. "It's just routine monitoring and I'm feeling stronger." The truth was, I needed space to process the rapid changes in my life, to integrate the medical journey with my new personal reality. The 20-minute drive to the medical center provided exactly that. Quiet reflection time as Portland's familiar streets passed by my window. "Your numbers look excellent," Dr. Chen confirmed, reviewing my latest blood work. "You're responding to treatment better than we initially projected." "What does that mean for the overall prognosis?" I asked, always focused on the strategic outlook. She smiled, understanding my need for clear metrics. "It means we're increasingly confident about full remission. Your type of cancer, caught at the stage we did, with your positive response to treatment, the statistical outlook is very favorable." The word favorable echoed in my mind as I drove home, carrying a lighter spirit than I had in months. My body was healing, fighting back against the cellular betrayal that had threatened my life. My financial situation was secure, protected by strategic action against marital betrayal. The future, which had seemed so precarious just months ago, was stabilizing on multiple fronts. At home, I found another delivery. Not flowers this time, but a thick envelope from Jack's lawyer. Inside was a comprehensive legal separation agreement, detailed financial disclosures, and a handwritten note from Jack. "Tried to make this as straightforward and fair as possible. Take your time reviewing. No pressure, no games. Whatever you decide, I support." I called Thomas immediately to arrange a proper legal review, but my initial impression was one of surprised appreciation. The terms were indeed fair, generous even. Jack had assigned me full ownership of our home, maintained me as the beneficiary on his life insurance policies, and proposed a substantial monthly support payment for as long as needed during treatment and recovery. There were no hidden clauses, no subtle attempts to mitigate his culpability or limit his financial responsibility. Just a clean, clear acknowledgement of obligation and an attempt to provide security without strings attached. When Thomas confirmed this assessment during our meeting the next day, I found myself unexpectedly moved. Not toward forgiveness, that was a separate journey I wasn't ready to begin, but toward recognition that even amid profound failure, Jack was attempting to do right by me now. "Do you want to counter with different terms?" Thomas asked, watching. Me process this development. "No," I decided after careful consideration. "These are fair, more than fair." "You're entitled to ask for more," he reminded me gently. "Given the circumstances." "I know," I acknowledged. "But I've secured what I needed most: stability during my treatment, control over my living situation, income from the building. The rest is just details." Thomas nodded, respecting my decision. "I'll review the final language to ensure everything is properly documented, but overall, this is a reasonable framework." As he gathered the paperwork, he hesitated. "Emma, may I speak frankly, as someone who's come to consider you a friend as well as a client?" "Of course." "I've handled many separations and divorces involving betrayal," he said carefully. "What's unusual here is Jack's response since being caught. No fighting, no excuses, no attempts to minimize financial responsibility. It's noteworthy." "Are you suggesting I should reconsider the marriage?" I asked, more curious than defensive. "Not at all," he clarified quickly. "Just observing that whatever path you choose, divorce, continued separation, or even eventual reconciliation, you're dealing with someone showing genuine accountability. That makes any path forward cleaner than most cases I handle." His observation stayed with me as I drove home, contemplating the strange journey that had brought me here. From the shock of cancer diagnosis to the devastation of discovering Jack's affair, to the strategic acquisition of the Westbrook Building, to this moment of unexpected equilibrium, life had taken more twists than any novel I'd ever read. At home, I found Barbara had let herself in with the spare key I'd given her, preparing a light dinner that accommodated my treatment-sensitive appetite. "I hope you don't mind," she said, noticing my surprise. "I wanted to make sure you had something nourishing after your appointment." "It's perfect," I assured her, touched by her continuing care despite the complicated family dynamics. As we ate, she updated me on Jack's situation, his final day at Horizon Tech, his preparations to move to Seattle next week, his sessions with a therapist to understand why he made such destructive choices. "He asked if I thought you might ever forgive him," she mentioned carefully, watching for my reaction. "What did you tell him?" "That forgiveness is earned, not granted on request," she replied, "and that his focus should be on becoming worthy of it, whether or not it ever comes." I nodded, appreciating her wisdom. "That's exactly right." "He seems to be taking it to heart," she observed. "Robert says he's never seen Jack so focused on genuine self-improvement rather than appearances. Though, of course, it's early days." After dinner, as Barbara was preparing to leave, she paused at the door. "We've arranged a small gathering on Sunday, just family and very close friends, a celebration of your positive treatment response. Nothing strenuous, just a few hours of good company and support. Would that be all right?" The gesture was so thoughtful that I felt tears threatening, the emotional fragility that often accompanied treatment surfacing unexpectedly. "That would be lovely," I managed. "Thank you." Alone that evening, I sat in the garden as twilight settled over Portland, reflecting on the strange new landscape of my life. The crisis that had propelled me to such decisive action was resolving, leaving space for a question I hadn't had the luxury to consider during my months of strategic planning. What did I want for my future beyond mere survival? My phone buzzed with a text from Jack. "Finalized Seattle arrangements today. Starting. There next Wednesday. Good luck with your treatment tomorrow. If you need anything at all, anything, I'm still here." I considered not responding, as I often didn't to his periodic check-ins. But something, perhaps the day's positive medical news, perhaps the fair separation terms, perhaps simply the peaceful evening, prompted me to reply. "Thank you for the straightforward separation agreement. It helps to address things clearly. Good luck in Seattle." His response came quickly. "Thanks for reviewing it. Tried to do right by you, though I know it doesn't erase what happened. Taking things day by day up here. Hoping for continued good news about your treatment." The simple exchange felt like a tiny step toward something. Not reconciliation, not friendship, but perhaps a more honest interaction than we'd had in months. Like so much else in my current reality, it was complicated, nuanced, impossible to reduce to simple categories of good or bad, right or wrong. The next morning brought an email from Michael Barnes, checking in about the advisory board position and attaching formal documentation for my consideration whenever the timing feels appropriate. I appreciated both the opportunity and his sensitivity to my current priorities. As I prepared for my treatment session later that day, I found myself in front of the mirror, studying my reflection. The physical changes from cancer were evident. The weight loss, the scarf-covering hair loss, the particular pallor that came with aggressive treatment. But there were other changes too, less visible, but more profound. The woman looking back at me had faced mortality and betrayal simultaneously, and had emerged not just surviving, but strategically victorious. She had protected herself when no one else could. She had leveraged her intelligence and foresight to secure her future. She had refused to be a victim of either disease or deception. Yet the victory felt different than I'd imagined when formulating my plan. Less like triumph over an adversary, more like succeeding at the complex task of self-preservation. Less like winning a war, more like navigating safely through treacherous waters. Barbara arrived to drive me to treatment, her car once again, stocked with every comfort and contingency. Blankets for hospital chills, ginger candies for nausea, downloaded podcasts for distraction during the long infusion hours. "Ready for battle?" she asked as I buckled my seatbelt. I considered the question, thinking about the multiple fronts where I'd been fighting. "Yes," I said finally, "but I think the nature of the battle is changing." She glanced at me curiously. "How so?" "Cancer treatment is straightforward in its way. Follow protocols, endure side effects, trust the process. The battle against betrayal was similar. Gather evidence, secure position, implement consequences. I watched Portland's familiar streets pass by outside my window. But what comes after survival is more complex. It requires different strategies." "What kind of strategies?" she asked, genuinely interested in my perspective. I thought about Jack's upcoming move to Seattle, about the advisory board position awaiting my decision, about the empty spaces in my home where his belongings had been, about the future stretching before me, uncertain in many ways, but secure in the fundamental aspects I had fought to protect. "I'm not entirely sure yet," I admitted, "but I think they involve building something new rather than just defending what exists, creating rather than protecting." At the treatment center, Dr. Chen greeted us with her customary calm efficiency, reviewing my latest blood work before starting the infusion. "Your numbers continue to improve," she confirmed. "If this trajectory continues, we may be able to reduce the intensity of your remaining treatments." "That's wonderful news," Barbara exclaimed, squeezing my hand. The elevator doors closed behind me, sealing me away from the chaos I'd left in Horizon Tech's executive suite. For a moment, I allowed myself to lean against the cool metal wall, the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation beginning to ebb. "You should sit. Down?" Thomas said, his voice gentle but firm. "You've had quite a morning." I shook my head. "Not yet. Not until we're out of this building." The last thing I needed was to appear weak now, not when I'd just demonstrated my strength so convincingly. As the elevator descended to the parking garage, my phone exploded with notifications. Jack, calling repeatedly. Rebecca, surprisingly, had sent a text. "I didn't know about your cancer treatments. I swear." Michael Barnes, Horizon's CEO, requesting an urgent meeting to discuss matters separate from personal issues. Jack's assistant, forwarding me his suddenly cleared schedule for the rest of the day. And most interestingly, 3 other executives from the company sending quiet messages of support. "He abandoned you during cancer treatment. What kind of monster?" wrote the HR director, a woman who had always been warm to me at company events. "Whatever you decide about the lease, I respect your strength," messaged the operations manager, who'd lost his own wife to cancer 2 years earlier. The technology era had an interesting way of quickly dissolving the boundaries between personal and professional lives. Word was spreading through the company faster than Jack could control the narrative. In the car, Thomas handed me a bottle of water. "Drink. You're pale." I complied, suddenly aware of the fatigue weighing on my body. Fighting cancer was exhausting. Enough. Fighting a duplicitous husband simultaneously required reserves of strength I wasn't entirely sure I possessed. "He'll call his lawyer next," I predicted, checking my watch. "Probably Alan Mitchell. They play golf together on Thursdays." "We're prepared for that," Thomas assured me. "The purchase is airtight. The lease violations are documented, and frankly, no judge in Portland would look favorably on a man trying to outmaneuver his cancer-stricken wife." I smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised what people are capable of when their backs are against the wall." Jack built his career on turning bad situations to his advantage. "So did you," Thomas reminded me, "before you left finance to support his career." That was the part of the story Jack had conveniently forgotten over the years, that before becoming his wife, I'd been a successful investment manager at Pacific Northwest Capital. I'd stepped back when we married, partly because we planned to start a family soon, partly because his ego needed to be the primary breadwinner. A compromise I'd been willing to make for love. One of many. By the time we reached my house, my phone showed 17 missed calls from Jack, 5 from his mother, and 1 from Dr. Chen's office. A reminder about my medication schedule that felt almost comically mundane given the morning's events. Olivia was waiting in the kitchen, pacing nervously. "Well, how did it go?" "Exactly according to plan," I said, lowering myself carefully onto a bar stool at the island. "Actually, better than planned. The entire executive team witnessed everything. Jack's professional reputation is hanging by a thread, and he knows it." "And Rebecca?" Olivia couldn't hide the vindictive interest in her voice. "Destroyed," Thomas answered before I could. Emma was surgical. I wouldn't have chosen that particular adjective. It hit too close to home given my ongoing medical situation. But it was accurate. I had excised Rebecca from Jack's professional life as cleanly as Dr. Chen had removed the tumor from my breast. "What happens now?" Olivia asked, sliding a cup of ginger tea toward me. "We wait," I replied, checking my phone as another call from Jack lit up the screen. "He has 24 hours to comply with my terms." "Will he?" Thomas looked skeptical. "The smart play would be immediate and complete capitulation," I analyzed dispassionately. "Resign as CFO, end things with Rebecca, move out. Try to preserve what's left of his professional reputation." "But people rarely make the smart play when their emotions are involved," Olivia observed. "Precisely why I gave him 24 hours, I replied. "Time to cycle through denial, anger, bargaining, and hopefully, acceptance." My phone buzzed again. Barbara, Jack's mother, for the 6th time. I couldn't avoid that conversation indefinitely. "I should take this," I said, standing up with effort. "Want privacy?" Olivia asked. I shook my head. No more secrets. No more hiding. I answered the call, putting it on speaker. "Hello, Barbara." "Emma, what on earth is happening?" Her voice was strained with confusion and worry. "Jack called us in a state. Something about you buying his company building. He's not making any sense." I took a deep breath. "It's true, Barbara. I purchased the Westbrook Building through an investment company. Horizon Tech is now my tenant." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds before she spoke. Again. "But why would you do that without telling Jack?" "For the same reason Jack has been seeing his marketing director for the past 6 months without telling me," I said quietly. "The relationship between your son and me has developed certain gaps in communication." Another long silence. "Are you saying Jack is having an affair?" Her voice had dropped to a whisper. "Yes." The simplicity of that single word belied the months of pain behind it. "During your cancer treatment?" The horror in her voice was unmistakable. "He missed my 2nd chemotherapy session to take her to Cascade Mountain Resort," I confirmed, the memory still sharp enough to cut. "There have been many similar incidents since then." I heard Barbara's breathing change, becoming uneven. "I don't understand. This isn't like him." "I thought the same thing for a long time," I admitted. I made excuses, looked the other way, told myself he was just struggling with my diagnosis. But eventually, the evidence became impossible to ignore. "Why didn't you tell us?" The hurt in her voice was palpable. "Because I needed time to secure my position," I answered honestly. "Jack controls our finances. If I'd confronted him without preparation, I could have found myself fighting cancer without health insurance or financial support." "We would never have allowed that," Barbara protested. "I couldn't take that risk," I said gently. "Not when my life was literally at stake." Barbara was quiet for a moment, digesting this. "And now? What happens now?" "That depends on Jack," I explained. "I've given him terms. If he meets them, Horizon Tech keeps its lease. If not, I let the implication hang. You would punish an entire company? I would hold your son accountable for his actions, I corrected. The company is simply leverage. I could almost hear Barbara's worldview shifting, reconciling. The sweet daughter-in-law she thought she knew with the strategic adversary I had become. Robert and I will be there in an hour, she said finally, referring to Jack's father. This needs to be discussed as a family. After she hung up, Olivia raised her eyebrows. Family intervention. Didn't see that coming. I did, I sighed, feeling exhaustion creeping into my bones. Barbara and Robert built their whole identity around having the perfect family. Jack is their only child, their golden boy. They'll try to mediate, to preserve the appearance of family unity. Will that work for you? Thomas asked carefully. I considered the question. What would work for me is a husband who didn't abandon me when I needed him most. What would work for me is not having to use property law to ensure I'm not left destitute while fighting for my life. What would work for me is a marriage based on the promises we actually made to each other. I shook my head. But none of those options exist anymore. My phone rang again. Jack, for the 19th time. This time I answered. You've made your point, he said immediately, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. Now let's talk like adults. We are talking, I replied calmly, and I made my terms very clear. You can't expect me to just resign, Emma. Do you have any idea what that would do to my career? About the same thing that a cancer diagnosis does to a person's life, forces them to reevaluate everything, I observed. And yet, somehow, people adapt. This isn't a game, he snapped. No, it isn't, I agreed. Games have clearer rules, and cheating has immediate consequences. Real life is messier. Consequences get delayed, but they always arrive eventually. Your parents are coming over, he said, changing tactics. Let's all sit down and discuss this reasonably. Your parents, I corrected. And yes, I know, Barbara called me. I'll be there too, he added. That's your choice, I replied. But it won't change my terms. After hanging up, I turned to Thomas. You should go. This is about to get personal in ways that might make you uncomfortable. He nodded, gathering his briefcase. Call me immediately if he makes any threats or if you feel unsafe in any way. I almost laughed at the idea of feeling physically threatened by Jack, who flinched at the sight of needles and once nearly fainted when I cut my finger cooking. But I understood Thomas's concern. Cornered animals could become unpredictable. I'll stay, Olivia declared, brooking no argument. You shouldn't face this alone. While we waited for the family summit to begin, I took my afternoon medications, chased with a protein shake that tasted like liquid chalk, but that Dr. Chen insisted would help maintain my strength. I also changed into fresh clothes, not to impress Jack or his parents, but because taking control of my appearance was one of the few aspects of cancer I could manage. The doorbell rang at precisely 1 o'clock. Barbara was nothing if not punctual, a trait she had instilled in her son. Through the security camera, I could see her standing rigidly beside Robert, whose usually jovial face was set in grim lines. Jack paced behind them, running his hands through his hair, a nervous habit from childhood. Olivia squeezed my hand. Remember why you're doing this. I nodded, straightening my shoulders before opening the door. Barbara's eyes widened slightly as she took in my appearance. Despite my best efforts, cancer and chemotherapy had left their marks. The weight loss, the scarf covering my hair loss, the particular pallor that came with battling cellular rebellion. For a moment, raw emotion flashed across her face. Horror, pity, guilt. Emma, she said finally, stepping forward to embrace me with uncharacteristic gentleness, as though I might break. You look like I'm fighting cancer, I supplied when she couldn't finish. That's because I am. Robert hugged me next, his large frame somehow diminished by the circumstances. We had no idea things had gotten so difficult, he murmured. Jack stood awkwardly behind his parents, unable to meet my eyes. The contrast was striking. Just hours ago in his office, he'd been all desperate bravado. Now, flanked by his parents in our home, he looked like a scolded child. "Please come." "In," I said, stepping back to allow them entry. Olivia had prepared coffee and arranged a cheese plate that I knew I wouldn't touch. Nausea remained a constant companion. But that would give our guests something to do with their hands during difficult conversations. "This is Olivia Martinez," I introduced as we settled in the living room. "My friend who has been taking me to chemotherapy appointments for the past 3 months." The pointed reminder hit its mark. Barbara flinched visibly, while Robert's jaw tightened. "We thought Jack was—" Barbara began. "So did I cut in gently. That was the plan. Until it wasn't." Jack finally spoke. "This isn't solely about me missing appointments. You're making it sound like I abandoned you completely." Olivia made a choking sound that she quickly disguised as a cough. "Let's be precise," I suggested, reaching for my phone. "In the last 3 months, I've had 6 chemotherapy sessions. You attended the first one, missed the second for a weekend with Rebecca, showed up late to the third and left early for a client dinner that was actually drinks with Rebecca, missed the fourth due to a conference where you gave her that bracelet, made the fifth but spent the entire time on your phone coordinating your Seattle trip with her, and missed the sixth yesterday because of your big presentation that never actually existed." Jack's face flushed. "You've been tracking me?" "I've been documenting a pattern," I corrected. "The same way I documented the gradually increasing withdrawals from our joint savings account, the one we established specifically for medical expenses not covered by insurance." "I was under financial pressure," he began defensively. "Yes," I agreed. "The pressure of maintaining 2 relationships simultaneously is indeed expensive. Especially when one woman thinks she's getting a sapphire bracelet for her birthday and the other is getting a weekend at the Four Seasons." Barbara made a small pained sound. "Jack, how could you?" "Mom, this isn't what it looks like," Jack tried, falling back on the oldest excuse in the book. What it looks like," Robert said slowly, his deep voice rumbling with barely contained anger, "is that you've been cheating on your wife while she undergoes cancer treatment, spending her medical fund to do it, and lying to everyone involved." Put so bluntly, even Jack couldn't spin a defense. He stared at the floor, momentarily silenced. "What I don't understand," Barbara said, turning to me, "is why you didn't come to us when you first discovered this. We would have helped you." "I considered it," I admitted. But then I realized something important. This isn't just about Jack's infidelity. It's about my agency, my independence. I didn't want to be the pitiful cancer patient whose husband cheated, requiring rescue by her in-laws. I needed to secure my own position. "By secretly buying his company's building?" Jack interjected, finding his voice again. "That's not independence, Emma. That's vindictive." "No, Jack," I corrected calmly. "Vindictive would be sending evidence of your affair to every client and employee at Horizon Tech. Vindictive would be calling your corporate credit card company to report fraudulent charges for all those hotel rooms. Vindictive would be forwarding Rebecca's Instagram posts to HR with a complaint about hostile work environment." I leaned forward slightly. "What I did was protective. I secured an asset that ensures my financial stability regardless of what happens to our marriage." "And what is happening to our marriage?" Barbara asked quietly. I turned to her with genuine regret. I had always liked my mother-in-law, despite her occasional tendency toward micromanagement. "That depends entirely on Jack. I've given him my terms." "Ultimatums aren't how marriages work," Jack protested. "Neither is adultery," Olivia muttered, not quite under her breath. I've tried the other approaches, I explained, feeling suddenly weary. I tried ignoring the signs. I tried giving you the benefit of the doubt. I tried focusing on my health and trusting you to honor your commitments. None of those strategies worked. Robert cleared his throat. What exactly are your terms, Emma? Jack resigns as CFO of Horizon Tech, ends his relationship with Rebecca completely, and moves out of this house, I recited. If he does those things within 24 hours, the company keeps its lease with only a reasonable market adjustment to the rent. You're trying to destroy my career, Jack accused. Your choices have consequences, I replied simply. As CFO, you authorized late rent payments because you were distracted by your affair. You used company resources to conduct that affair. You've created a potentially explosive HR situation. These aren't fabrications, Jack. They're documented facts. And if he refuses? Robert asked, ever the pragmatist. Then I exercise my rights as building owner. Horizon Tech will need to find new office space within 30 days. Difficult to do in the current market, and Jack will need to find himself a good lawyer. For what? Jack demanded. For when I file for divorce and present evidence that you misused our joint funds, including money specifically saved for medical treatments, to finance your affair, I explained calmly. Oregon is an equitable distribution state, Jack. Equitable doesn't always mean equal, especially when one spouse has acted in bad faith. The room fell silent as the full implications settled over everyone. Barbara looked stricken, Robert contemplative, and Jack, for perhaps the first time since this began, truly afraid. This isn't just about punishing Jack, is it? Robert asked finally, studying me with the shrewd assessment that had made him successful in business. No, I admitted. It's about survival. When you're diagnosed with cancer, you quickly learn to identify and eliminate threats, whether they're cellular or marital. Emma, Jack leaned forward, his voice softening into the tone he used when trying to close important deals. I know I've made terrible mistakes, unforgivable ones, but there must be another way forward that doesn't involve dismantling both our lives. Our lives were dismantled the moment my doctor said the word malignant, I reminded him. Everything changed that day. I changed. But while I was fighting for my life, you were building an exit strategy. That's not fair, he protested weakly. No, it isn't, I agreed. None of this is fair. Cancer at 34 isn't fair. A husband who abandons his wedding vows while his wife is undergoing chemotherapy isn't fair. Having to use property law to protect myself because I can't trust my life partner, that's the definition of unfair. Barbara dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Jack, how could you do this? We raised you better. Mom, please, Jack said, exasperation creeping into his voice. This is between Emma and me. Not anymore, Robert stated flatly. Not when you've compromised your company, your employees' livelihoods, and your family's reputation. Jack stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked our carefully landscaped backyard. The yard where we'd once talked about installing a playset for the children we planned to have. So what happens now? Emma holds the company hostage until I agree to professional suicide? Dramatic as always, I commented. Resigning as CFO isn't professional suicide. It's a career adjustment. People survive those too. And what about us? He asked, turning back to face me. Is there any path forward for our marriage? The question hung in the air between us, weighted with 5 years of shared history and 3 months of betrayal. I'd asked myself the same question countless nights as I lay awake, nauseous from treatment, scrolling through evidence of his deception. I don't know, I answered honestly. That wasn't part of my strategic planning. So this was all about securing your position? Jack looked almost wounded, as though my financial self-protection was somehow more hurtful than his repeated, Infidelity. "Don't you dare make her the villain here," Olivia interjected fiercely. "She's fighting for her life on multiple fronts because you couldn't keep your promises or your pants on." "Olivia," I said softly, "it's okay." "It's not okay," she insisted. "None of this is okay." "No," I agreed, "but it's where we are." Barbara rose from her seat, smoothing her slacks with shaking hands. "Robert and I need to discuss this privately, and I think Jack needs time to consider his options without our presence. And I think Jack needs time to consider his options without our presence." She turned to me, her eyes full of conflicted emotions. "Emma, I am so deeply sorry for everything you've been through, for our part in failing to see what was happening. You're not responsible for Jack's choices," I said gently. "Perhaps not," she acknowledged, "but we are responsible for how we respond to them now." After Jack's parents left, promising to return later that evening, an uncomfortable silence settled over the living room. Jack remained by the window, his reflection in the glass showing a man I barely recognized anymore. "I should go too," Olivia said quietly. "Call me if you need anything at all." Once we were alone, Jack turned to face me. "You've thought of everything, haven't you? The building, the documentation, my parents. A perfect trap." "Not a trap," I corrected. "A consequence. And I learned strategic thinking from you, Jack. All those nights you explained your business maneuvers, your clever financial plays. I was paying attention. Clearly," he said bitterly. "So what happens if I meet your terms? I resign, end things with Rebecca, move out. Then what? Then Horizon Tech keeps its lease, your colleagues keep their jobs, and you get to rebuild your career somewhere else," I explained. "As for us, we would need to have a different conversation after you've demonstrated genuine remorse." "And if that's not enough for you?" he pressed. "If you've already decided our marriage is over?" I considered the question carefully. "I haven't decided anything beyond ensuring my immediate security. The future remains unwritten." Jack moved to sit across from me, his expression serious. "I need to know something. When did you start planning this? When did you first suspect about Rebecca?" "I had suspicions about 2 months ago," I admitted. "Small things. Changes in your schedule, new cologne, increased secrecy with your phone. But I didn't have confirmation until that day Olivia took me to chemotherapy and I saw the photo of you two at Cascade Mountain Resort. And the building. Purchase. I began researching the possibility the next day," I said. "It took 6 weeks to arrange." He shook his head slowly, a reluctant admiration mixing with his anger. "While going through chemo, while I thought you were too sick to function normally, you were orchestrating all of this. Cancer teaches you to use your good days wisely," I said simply, "and to prepare for the bad ones. Did you ever consider just talking to me? Confronting me directly?" The question was so absurd that I actually laughed, though the sound held no humor. "From what position of strength, Jack? As your increasingly dependent sick wife? With what leverage? The moral high ground isn't particularly useful when you're potentially facing both cancer and financial ruin." He flinched at the bluntness of my assessment. "I wouldn't have left you financially vulnerable." "Your actions suggested otherwise," I countered. "Every withdrawal from our medical fund, every missed appointment, every lie about where you were spending our money. Each one was a message about how much, or how little, my well-being mattered." "That's not fair," he protested again. "We've established that none of this is fair," I reminded him. "But it is accurate." Jack leaned forward, running his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture of frustration. "I don't even know who you are anymore. This calculated, ruthless person. This isn't the Emma I married." "The irony of that statement is breathtaking," I observed. "I'm not the one who fundamentally changed in this relationship, Jack. I simply adapted to survive the changes in you." "So what now?" he asked finally. "I just surrender? Give up my position, my relationship, my home?" "Those are the terms," I confirmed. "And I believe they're remarkably generous considering the alternatives. Such as? Such as me providing Michael Barnes with complete documentation of how his CFO has been misusing company resources to conduct an affair with the marketing director," I explained calmly. "Or me filing for divorce immediately and seeking an emergency financial order based on your misappropriation of our joint funds. Or me contacting the state medical insurance board about potential fraud in how our health expenses have been reported and compensated." With each option, Jack's face grew paler. He had always known the rules, the legal boundaries, the corporate policies, the insurance regulations, but had assumed his charm and position would protect him from their enforcement. Now he was confronting the reality that rules existed for a reason, and he was no longer exempt. 24 hours, I reminded him. That's how long you have to decide. My phone buzzed with a notification. Dr. Chen's office confirming my next treatment appointment. The ordinary intrusion of my ongoing cancer battle felt almost surreal amid the high-stakes personal drama unfolding in our living room. Jack noticed the message. "When's your next treatment?" "Thursday," I answered, surprised by the question. It was the first time in weeks he'd shown any interest in my treatment schedule. "Will Olivia be taking you?" "Yes," I said simply. He nodded slowly, processing this. "I really have lost everything, haven't I?" "You've lost what you chose to discard," I corrected. "There's a difference." As the afternoon sunlight began to fade, Jack finally stood to leave. "I need time to think, to talk to people." "Rebecca." I supplied the name he couldn't bring himself to say in our home. "You can say her name. She's a significant factor in your decision-making process." He flinched slightly. "Yes, among others." 24 hours, Jack," I reminded him as he reached the door. "Not a minute more." After he left, the house fell into a silence so profound I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I sank onto the couch, finally allowing the exhaustion I'd been fighting all day to wash over me. My body, the traitor that had first betrayed me with cancer, was demanding rest after the emotional marathon of the day. But even as fatigue claimed me, my mind remained clear. I had done what was necessary. I had protected myself in a world where, as I'd learned twice now, no one else could be fully trusted to do so. Not my body, which had grown mutinous cells, and not my husband, who had grown a second life while mine hung in the balance. My phone woke me from a shallow sleep, Thomas checking in for an update. "Phase 2 progressing as expected," I told him. "Jack is considering his options. His parents are involved now." "Barbara and Robert? That's unexpected," Thomas sounded concerned. "They have significant influence in Portland's business community." "They're not adversaries in this," I assured him. "They're as shocked and disappointed by Jack's behavior as anyone. Maybe more so." "And if Jack refuses your terms?" "He won't," I said with certainty. "He's many things, but stupid isn't one of them. He'll calculate the odds and make the rational choice." After ending the call, I forced myself to eat a small dinner, nutrition being another battlefield in my cancer fight, and took my evening medications. The house felt cavernous around me, filled with memories that now seemed to belong to different people. The kitchen where we'd danced while cooking Sunday dinners. The stairs we'd raced up like children. The bedroom where we'd planned our future family. Cancer had already forced me to contemplate life's impermanence. Jack's betrayal had simply expanded that contemplation to include the impermanence of love. My phone buzzed again, an email notification. I expected another message from Jack or perhaps Thomas, but instead found a formal communication from Horizon Tech's board of directors requesting a meeting tomorrow afternoon regarding their lease situation. Interesting. They were moving faster than I'd anticipated, clearly not willing to leave their company's fate solely in Jack's hands. A text followed moments later, from a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Johnson, this is Michael Barnes. I apologize for the intrusion. The board has been informed of the situation with our lease and Mr. Johnson's. Personal complications. We would like to discuss options that might protect both Horizon Tech and your interests. Separate from any decisions Mr. Johnson makes." So they were cutting Jack out of the negotiations. Smart. I forwarded the message to Thomas with a simple instruction. "Prepare options for tomorrow. Board seeking separate resolution." My strategic planning hadn't accounted for this development, but adaptability was another lesson cancer had taught me well. When treatment protocols failed, you adjusted. When side effects became unmanageable, you found alternatives. When your husband betrayed you during your most vulnerable time, you purchased his company's building and leveraged it to secure your future. Life, I was learning, rewarded those who refused to be victims of their circumstances. The doorbell rang at precisely 8 o'clock. Barbara and Robert returning as promised, this time without Jack. "He's at a hotel," Barbara explained as I let them in. "We thought it would be better to speak with you alone first." Robert's expression was grim but determined. "Emma, we want you to know that regardless of what happens between you and Jack, we consider you family. Your health and well-being matter to us." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by their loyalty despite the circumstances. "We've spoken with Jack at length," Barbara continued as we settled in the living room. "He's struggling to accept the reality of his situation." Translation: "He's still looking for loopholes," I observed dryly. Robert nodded, not bothering to sugarcoat the truth. He mentioned exploring legal options regarding the building purchase. "There are none," I stated confidently. "The transaction was completely legitimate. I used my inheritance, funds that were explicitly left to me alone. The purchase was conducted through proper channels with full legal documentation." "We assumed as much," Barbara acknowledged. "You've always been thorough." "What Jack fails to understand," I explained, "is that I didn't break any rules. I simply used the existing ones to my advantage, exactly as he would have done in my position." "The board has reached out to you directly," Robert noted. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I confirmed, unsurprised that he was already aware. Portland's business community was small, and Robert's connections were extensive. "They're seeking a resolution that doesn't depend on Jack's decisions." "Smart," he approved. "They recognize that Jack's personal issues have compromised his judgment." "What will you tell them?" Barbara asked cautiously. I considered the question. "That depends on what happens with Jack. My primary concern was securing my position. If that can be achieved without damaging 40 innocent employees' livelihoods, I would prefer that outcome." Robert leaned forward, his expression grave, but respectful. "Emma, I want to make something very clear. If Jack fails to meet your terms, if he chooses to fight you rather than accept responsibility for his actions, Barbara and I will support you, not him." Barbara nodded in solemn agreement. "What he's done is indefensible. To betray you during cancer treatment, to misuse funds meant for your medical care." Her voice broke slightly. "That's not the son we thought we raised." Their unexpected alliance brought a lump to my throat that had nothing to do with cancer or medication side effects. I had been prepared for them to choose blood over marriage, to defend Jack despite his actions. Their moral clarity was both surprising and deeply moving. "Thank you," I managed finally. "That means more than I can express." "We've also taken the liberty of consulting with our own financial advisor," Robert added. "We want to ensure that you have access to the best treatment options, Regardless of insurance complications or Jack's cooperation, your health comes first. The irony wasn't lost on me that my in-laws were now stepping up to fulfill the promises my husband had abandoned. The safety net I'd fought so desperately to secure myself was being reinforced by the very family I'd feared might become adversaries. "We should discuss tomorrow's meeting with the board," Robert suggested, his business mind always moving forward. "They'll likely propose separating Jack's situation from the company's lease obligations." "That would be the logical approach," I agreed, though implementing it might be complicated. "Not necessarily," Robert mused. "With the right structure in place, Horizon Tech could continue operations while addressing the internal HR situation independently." As we discussed potential scenarios, my phone lit up with a notification. Jack had posted on Instagram for the first time in weeks. Curious, I opened the app to find a somber black and white photo of our wedding day with a cryptic caption, "Facing the consequences of my actions. Some mistakes can't be undone." Barbara noticed my expression change. "What is it?" I showed her the post, watching as she processed this public acknowledgement of Jack's wrongdoing. "He's setting the narrative," I observed, getting ahead of the gossip. "Is that a problem?" Robert asked. "Not necessarily," I replied, "but it suggests he's thinking about his image rather than genuine accountability." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with consecutive text messages. First from Rebecca. "I've resigned from Horizon effective immediately. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused. You deserved better." Then from Jack. "I've submitted my resignation to the board. Will be effective immediately after tomorrow's transition meeting." 3 months later, I stood in the lobby of the Westbrook Building, surveying what was now indisputably mine. The property management company had installed a discreet plaque recognizing Phoenix Rising Properties as the owner, a daily reminder to everyone who entered of the transformation that had occurred here. Today marked 2 significant milestones: my final cancer treatment and my first official meeting as a member of Horizon Tech's advisory board. The timing felt poetic, an ending and beginning perfectly aligned. "Emma," Michael Barnes greeted me warmly as I stepped off the elevator to the executive floor. "Everyone's eager to hear your thoughts on the expansion proposal." I smiled, adjusting the silk scarf around my neck, no longer to hide hair loss, but as a fashion choice as my hair had begun growing back in soft waves. "I've reviewed the numbers thoroughly. I think you'll find my analysis helpful." As I took my seat at the boardroom table, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass. Wall. Color had returned to my cheeks, strength to my posture, confidence to my eyes. The woman looking back at me was neither the desperately strategic cancer patient nor the betrayed wife, but someone new who incorporated elements of both alongside something entirely fresh. My phone buzzed discreetly, a text from Jack, now, "Settled in Seattle. Thinking of you today, last treatment, right? Congratulations on reaching this milestone." Our communication had evolved into something respectful and occasionally even warm. The legal separation continued, neither of us rushing toward divorce nor reconciliation, allowing time and distance to clarify what might come next. After the meeting, where my financial insights had been received with genuine appreciation, I returned to the main lobby, stopping to sign some documents with the building manager. "Mrs. Johnson," the receptionist called, "these just arrived for you." She handed me a beautiful arrangement of yellow tulips with a simple card. "To new beginnings. Proud of your victory on all fronts. Jay." Outside, Barbara waited to drive. Me to my final treatment, a celebration planned afterward with Olivia and close friends. As we drove, she asked the question that had been on everyone's mind lately. "Have you decided what comes next, now that treatment is ending?" I watched Portland's familiar streets pass by, thinking of all that had changed in the past 6 months. My health, my marriage, my professional identity. my understanding of my own capabilities. I'm considering several options, I replied, thoughtfully. The advisory board position is fulfilling. I might expand my property investments. Dr. Chen mentioned a patient support program that needs leadership. And Jack? She asked gently. I smiled, neither sad nor hopeful, simply at peace. That's a decision for another day. Right now, I'm focusing on what I've learned. That sometimes the path to healing requires acknowledging what's broken, securing what matters most, and then building something entirely new from the pieces that remain. As we approached the medical center for my final treatment, I felt a profound sense of completion. The woman who walked through those doors today was stronger, not despite what she had endured, but because of it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.